You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're here on the unceded traditional territory of the Salish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. This is Bernadine Fox, here with my co-host for the week, Glen Grigg, bringing you Both Sides Now. Dual diagnosis or concurrent disorders are common. In fact, 51% of people who have depression also deal with anxiety. 95% of people with a bipolar disorder meet the criteria for 3 or more other mental health difficulties. And about 23% of people with a serious mental health diagnosis self-medicate using drugs or alcohol. Today, we talk with an actor and musician, Donald Adams, about how he copes with the complication of living with several diagnoses while balancing an exciting life in theater and film.
Join us every Monday from 2:30 to 4 p.m. for She Boom. Open your ears to the sound of the latest and greatest women in music. Our show focuses entirely on female artists, from a local to global perspective. Every Monday from 2:30 to 4 p.m., tune in to She Boom on CFRO 100.5 FM Co-op Radio.
Donald, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us about mental health.
Sure, you're welcome. I am a mental health advocate for reasons that we'll discover later on. Also, I am an actor, and I also go by DG Adams when I am a songwriter-musician. And I was trained in classical theater at the Vancouver Playhouse Acting School. We did not do anything more modern than Bertolt Brecht.
Wow.
And then I ended up working for Stratford Festival and Bard on the Beach and some other stage companies, and had a 45-year career on the stage, and ended up teaching a lot of Shakespeare, including at Van Arts here in Vancouver.
And you've worked in film?
I have worked in film, especially since around 2005.
So tell us why you're a mental health advocate.
Well, I've been in the system since about 1982. I think I had my first visit to the emergency ward in Toronto for high anxiety. Mm-hmm. That was my first entry into the system and the medication and all the scary things that entailed.
And so then what happened?
Then what happened was I carried on, and I had a career in stage at Second City first in Toronto, and then I moved to Stratford, Ontario, where I worked, as I said, as a Shakespearean actor. And the anxiety problems persisted, depending on the circumstances in my life. I did go through a marriage breakup, and that was pretty heavy. And then things kind of leveled off for me later in the 80s. I became much happier and more relaxed, and the career was going well. And
so at some point, though, you were diagnosed with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Right?
Yeah, that happened much later. I mean, it may have been operating, for many years before the diagnosis, but that diagnosis actually happened in 2012, although it was pretty obvious that I was suffering from it before that. But I had the germophobia symptoms really badly, and as a result had very, very bad skin on my hands from hand washing, and this was around the time that I was first hospitalized.
So is that the only symptom of obsessive compulsive that you had, was the hand washing?
For me, yeah, I tended to be an obsessive thinker as well, which had gone further back into my past, but at this point it was definitely focused on germs and spreading germs and getting germs, and it all seems a bit absurd now, but it was very serious at the time.
Donald Adams, this is Glen Grigg chiming in.
Hi,
and
Greg.
You said two things that are quite striking. One is you said, I had problems with anxiety and I need to get some help from medications, professional people, and so on. And at the same time, you were a stage actor and not doing minor things. You were doing Stratford Festival and Second City. And I think, for me, I'm really interested in anything you might be able to tell us about the difference between having anxiety kind of deep in your process and what we normally associate with performance anxiety and stage fright.
Right.
If you can talk a bit about that, it'd be fascinating.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that no one's ever asked me. I would say that my anxiety, my clinical anxiety, was more existential. It was more like, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to die? What's going to happen with my life? Whereas stage nerves, although they do take their toll, are kind of manageable because you rehearse, you've got your fellow cast members, you have confidence in your talent.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of encouragement along the way.
For me, that's just absolutely powerful that, you're able to be so articulate about that distinction that, it's about a performance, about a situation, something. And the more troublesome kind of anxiety is about who you are.
Yes.
And you also talked about the relationship between thoughts and emotional experience. When I went to school, to be a registered clinical counselor and teach psychology and things like that, they said obsessive compulsive disorder has a lot to do with thinking. Is that consistent with your experience?
Yes. As I said, I tended to have obsessive thoughts about all kinds of things. Death and anything gloomy, pretty much.
Sure.
I remember Eric Clapton saying a quote from Eric Clapton, the great guitarist, saying every day he got up and just chose something different to suffer about, and I identified with that. Of course, he had famous addiction issues and so on.
But didn't you also say? I think if I remember from talking to you earlier that you had a lot of people who died in your life.
The early 90s, starting around 92, I had a laundry list of death and destruction like you wouldn't believe. My best...
No, well, you don't have to go through that.
Okay.
But it would seem to me that that's a real experience. So having anxiety about something happen that actually really did happen seems to be a normal thing.
It is, yeah. And I did receive medication for it. For instance, when my brother died in 1994, I remember receiving probably too much medication, just wanted to be numb, and I actually didn't work for an entire year after that. So that was a kind of a dark time for sure. And then there was, as you mentioned, there was a bunch of other deaths and problems that happened all around the same 2-year period. So it was pretty daunting.
You also did cognitive behavioral therapy for OCD. Did that help?
It definitely helped. I was referred to a therapist here in Vancouver for CBT.
Right.
Yeah. CBT, and I was told that this was kind of state-of-the-art therapy, and I followed through on the program. It was very difficult because there was all kinds of stuff they got you to do that was very uncomfortable.
Like what?
Well,
sorry to make you say this, but if you don't want to, that's fine.
No. They got you to do things that you would normally not avoid doing, to do with germs, to start to be conditioned to not worry about it so much.
So
and
not
you would
wash your
see
hands.
that nothing really bad happened as a result of your...
But how can you see that if the germs are invisible? I'm sorry,
I guess you have to just trust the therapist.
Okay.
I mean, she would take me out on field trips, and I could tell one thing. We went into a grocery store, and part of my affliction was being afraid of getting other people sick with my germs. So she would have me touch fruit in the grocery store and then put it back, and it made me squirm at the time. But now I kind of think it's funny because it actually helped.
It did help.
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't have that same kind of germophobia.
The funny thing is the thoughts still occur to me, but I don't embrace them.
So it's the embracing that becomes the problem,
it's
not the
attaching
thought
yourself
itself.
to them, and attaching importance and belief to them.
Don, I gotta jump in because you've given us such powerful information, and I'm kind of the psych guy for the show,
Yeah.
and I'm going to throw in a couple of things. Cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, is what we're talking about, and you were describing to us about how that therapy kind of takes apart the relationship between your thoughts, your experiences, and the consequences that come from thoughts and experiences. And you told us about two things that I want to get you talking about a little bit more. One was just kind of desensitizing yourself, doing
That's right.
something that feels pretty scary, pretty spooky, in the company of somebody who's very supportive.
Exactly.
And it sounds like that made a very big difference, to have the support to try something that would normally be pretty emotionally arousing, if not overwhelming.
I really had to trust her that it was all going to be okay. She'd done this with other people. No one had died. The patients
How would you know?
I just trusted.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Part of your mind's going to go, how do I know she's telling the truth?
You had a huge task to do. You had to sort out what's dangerous and what isn't.
Yeah, well, and to be honest, at the darkest part of that, which coincided with my bipolar diagnosis, I really thought my life was over at some of the worst points. I went, I can't handle this. I can't handle depression, anxiety, mania,
Yeah.
OCD, all this. I'll never work again. You know, all these thoughts came into my head, and they were all untrue, but I didn't know that at the time.
No,
and-
because we don't know people who survive and live beyond those diagnoses and do okay, right? We need to know more of that, and so I'm really glad you're here.
I'm one of the lucky ones, and I would say it was because when I was in the hospital, I was connected with really great counselors on the outside at a place called Concurrent Disorders, where if you have something like bipolar and you also abuse alcohol, which I had been doing, you can be treated for both things at once.
Great.
That's dual diagnosis, right, Glen?
Yeah, or concurrent. Those terms are used interchangeably. They're
And
not
I
very
had-
precise.
I had a particularly good counselor there who I identified with, and I don't know, you sometimes find a counselor that you have a bond with, and I definitely improved working with her.
One of the things that people in my profession know is that if you want to point to one thing that makes a difference in the therapy, it's the therapeutic relationship.
Yes.
And it sounds like that was central to your experience
Absolutely,
as well.
absolutely. And I do understand that when you're in the system that it can be a bit of a crapshoot who you connect with, what drugs you're diagnosed. It's not always cut and dry that you're going to end up on the lucky end of the stick.
Yeah.
It's
But it is
scary
true
that way.
that you can keep looking.
Yes,
Even if
exactly.
you don't find the right person to begin with, the point is to keep looking and keep
Yeah.
trying, and eventually you will find that person.
Absolutely. And that's what I tell people who are scared of, quote, the system. Yeah.
So, Dawn, tell us about the song we're about to hear.
Okay, this song is called The Terrorist. What it was an attempt by me to write about what it's like to be bipolar and what it feels like in your mind and in your heart and when you come out on the other side of it.
My mind has been a terrorist, hiding in the hills, swooping down to raid the town, to burn and wound and maim. But the people are resilient in facing the torturer's hand. They will not bow down to terror, no matter what its name. My heart has been an ocean with all its changing tides, rising, raging, ripping slack, bleeding red with evening sun, and with the rising of the sea comes flooding and destruction. My coastal towns are under siege, my sailors on the run. But tonight the sea is calm, and the townsfolk sleep in peace. The weather is like silk, and the present time is on, and an eerie stillness falls. The terrorists only whisper, I'll hoist my sails and gently glide into that golden bowl.
Something I want to see if you can talk a little bit about how alcohol might have featured in your life. What I've been educated to think about is that alcohol has some pretty powerful pharmacological effects, and it'll settle down some anxiety. And so
On the short term, yeah.
So it begins as something that, at least experientially, the way it plays out, it looks like it's helping, and then it blossoms into a problem,
Yes.
and then it piggybacks on the other problem. Can you talk a little bit about how you experienced that?
Well, I think it started out for me as kind of an occupational hazard, because actors tend to, because of their highs and lows and the nerves involved in the business, they tend to sort of go out after work and imbibe, sometimes
Yes.
to great extents. And so that was just kind of part of the territory for me for years and years. And I think what happened when I got sick in 2012 was they kind of went, okay, this has become a problem for you, and we want to clear the decks here. We're going to be dealing with some medication, and so they had me just stop drinking for a year. That
Right.
was the prescription, and that really helped me just have a full year with no falling back on that crutch,
Donald, I don't want to be inappropriately lighthearted about this, but
No.
listeners can't see the smile you had on your face. Relationships with things like alcohol develop over time, and it's like a breakup for some people. And I wonder if it might have
for
been like that
me,
for you.
Not really. I had the therapeutic support, and also I was afraid. I thought, what's my life going to be like? Like, what are parties going to be like? What's music going to be like? What's creativity going to be like? And it was all fine.
Yeah.
It was all fine. All the holidays, Christmas, birthdays, everything was fine. I was clear-headed, and I felt good, and I felt like I was doing something good for myself, and I had the support from the therapist. And
That's a fantastic message for us to get across. And I noticed it, and you said, and the support from the therapist is
Yeah.
key to that whole process.
Yeah. Because I knew that she had been through similar experiences, and there she was, being a successful therapist and fantastic person, and so that gave me confidence.
Wow.
I want you to talk about what it's like to have a myriad of diagnoses, not just one, not just depression or this or that, but what happens when you have a whole group of them. You have medication. If you were to help other people be able to look at that and get through that, what would you suggest to them?
Well, I just flashed back when you were talking about the diagnosis of depression. After my brother died, I was seeing a psychiatrist and a psychologist at that point because I needed it. And I remember one of the psychiatrists saying, I think you were depressed before your brother died. So he had identified something in my makeup that was just exacerbated by that event.
Yes.
And was already there in my makeup and indeed runs in my family, you know. Witnessed my brother's death. He died via suicide. And obviously medication to a certain extent addressed that. If you fast forward to 2012, yes, I had a whole bunch of stuff all at once. I was diagnosed with the OCD, bipolar disorder. Obviously, there was also some anxiety involved there. And and again, I have to say I just lucked out with the psychiatrist who found the right medication at the right time. And he admitted to me that sometimes it's a bit of a crapshoot. Like, we find the right one right away, and in my case, that was true.
I think all of life is a crapshoot.
Right.
You know?
And the more you can accept that, the happier you'll be.
Yeah, I mean, you get born into a certain family and you have no choice about it, and, you know, or life can happen and something bad happens to you, and the problem is not that the crapshoot happens, but that how you deal with it. And
Right.
it sounds like you've found a way to get through these things. And
I had a psychiatrist back in the 90s who said his definition of mental health was the ability to tolerate ambivalence, which means in life you have mixed feelings about everything that happens to you.
Exactly.
And if you feel, oh, I'm so hard done by, this is wrong, this is not the way life should be, and you're constantly fighting that, you're not going to be happy. But if you can, you know, roll with the highs, roll with the lows, and kind of stay somewhere in the middle, then you got a better chance of being mentally healthy.
yeah.
I think.
So we've been here with Donald Adams, that also goes by DJ Adams, depending on whether he's an actor or a musician at the moment. So thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about this. It's a very important topic because there are so many people who have more than one diagnosis that they live with on a daily basis. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome. I'm glad to help.
Donald, it's been great to be with somebody with big talents, big achievements, and big troubles to get through, and providing a real inspirational map for how to make all that roll, no matter how difficult it becomes.
Do you feel unsafe in your home?
You are not alone.
Transition houses offer free support and shelter for women and children.
We are here for you.
We are here for you. We are here for you.
Make the call.
1-800-VICTIM LINK.
1-800-563-0808.
bcsch.ca.
We're here with a responder from the TAL organization, that's the Therapist Exploitation Link Line, to go over what boundaries in therapy should look like and what's the impact when it doesn't look like that, when the therapy has morphed into something else. One of the things that I wanted to talk about this week was daily contact, or more than the usual once a week going into session and then, you know, the client goes home and does their life and then comes into therapy again. When therapy has become something where the therapist is checking in all the time or taking calls all the time, or there's some means that the client is allowed to have regular contact. Is that normal or usual or healthy?
It's not healthy and it's not normal. It really can change the relationship for the client because it becomes more like a friend or a parent figure when there is constant contact. It really, if there's contact with the therapist outside of a session, it really should be coming from the client, never the therapist to the client, because it really changes the relationship. Whereas, you know, if the client, you know, is having a difficult time and the therapist allows it, for them to reach out and just once in a while, probably via email, maybe not, most likely not via text message or a phone call, maybe a phone call, but it should really be coming from the client's court, not the therapist's court.
So client initiated in times of distress.
Absolutely.
And that could maybe lead to a session in the office, but shouldn't necessarily be a situation where they're calling the client or going to the client's home or having regular daily contact. I know in my case, it became daily contact, and sometimes several times a day, and sometimes several hours a day. And eventually it became a situation where it was constant, and it meant that everything I was doing, every decision I had to make, whether it was for food or what shoes to buy, was filtered through my therapist. And so in my mind, therapy is supposed to empower the client. But with this, even though it may have been some misguided attempt to be supportive, that I'm being gracious, the ultimate the ultimate impact on me was that I was unable to make decisions without grave concern about whether or not I was doing the right thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Comes very fertile ground for a codependent relationship. And I think when you see a therapist reaching out constantly to a client, it's a red sign that that therapist is having their own set of issues of, their loneliness and their insecurity or, marriage or family issues. And the relationship should be that hour a week, with the exception of maybe if the therapist allows it during, time of distress, the ability to reach out in a healthy mode of communication.
And therapy is also supposed to be this place where you empower your client to get up and move beyond you into life and be able to be on their own and be okay. And when you're doing something that actually is encouraging dependency, it screams not healthy.
No, I agree.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this week again, and we'll talk again soon.
You don't have all of the facts. You could be just making it up. Why don't I ever think of that? It's some kind of magic in the words that you breathe, saying, baby, take it from me. It's alright. It's alright. Don't you?
And that's our show for this week. Glen and I thank you for being here. If you have questions or feedback about Both Sides Now here on Vancouver Co-op Radio, or want to share your story, you can reach us through email, bothsidesnow@coopradio.org, or via Twitter @BothSidesNowBC. I'm Bernadine Fox, and we'll be back next week. Until then.
It's such a cliche, just words people say